Absolutely. So I do want to debunk all of those things. So that's a good point that you brought up, because it is one of the most common ones. Oh yeah, well the only reason that we had we're having these diseases because we're living longer, and we all got to 40 and died like that. So definitely want to go into that, and again have some data on that. So there's a number of factors that come into that, because
to lifespan you're talking about now.
Yeah. So when we look at longevity and how long we've lived for, and people will say, well, we only live to 40 and that's why. Well, there's a number of reasons, but the first one that I want to bring up is child mortality rates. So this is huge, because even from 1800 to 2020, this is the graph. Again, we'll bring it up on the screen, but you can see there.
Going straight down.
Yeah, you're talking close to 46%, almost 50%, where you had infant mortality. And that was due to a lot of disease back then, which I'll talk about further. So that alone has caused, like if you think of almost 50% of people dying at birth, so then if you average it out, the life expectancy is 40, but obviously if one child is born and unfortunately dies at birth, but then the second one will then live to 80, and then the average is 40, if you know what I mean.
That makes sense.
So when you factor that in, we have had small increases in life expectancy, but you're talking about like maybe 5-6 years, not like 40 years. Okay.
Wow.
So that's the first thing to kind of point out with the life expectancy. And even in the last few years, for the first time, life expectancy has actually taken a dip.
After COVID, right?
Well, even before COVID, it was starting to just dip in the last sort of 3 to 4 years, but definitely during that time. But so life expectancy has actually taken a dip. But again, bigger picture, 100, 200 years ago, no, we didn't get to 40 and just die. It was infant mortality was probably the biggest factor when you take that into account. So a health span is obviously we're maybe living longer because we've got good medical care, so it can keep us alive, but we're still sick. Then we get so we can technically live longer, but not healthier. So that would be my first point. So my second point then, when you look at that, is, well, and here's an interesting one. So question for people: what is the single biggest medical breakthrough in the last 200 years that has had the greatest impact on humanity?
I have a guess.
Okay.
Anesthesia.
So actually, sanitation.
Dang it.
Because a lot of people will say that. They'll say, antibiotics.
Just washing our hands.
Vaccines. But it's actually incredible. And that made a huge difference, because again, if you look at the biggest killers 100, 200 years ago was infectious disease. So when you think about that, it was, because we all got into cities and stuff like that, the sanitation, if you imagine there's no sanitation, it's terrible. And the places would stink and stuff like that. So that was a huge innovation and absolutely transformed. So literally the toilet is the number one biggest breakthrough that's probably saved more lives in the history of humanity than anything else. So it's actually sanitation that was the biggest breakthrough. And this was actually a survey done with the British Medical Journal, and they asked all the readers, and lots of them rated antibiotics and all these other things, penicillin, but actually number one was sanitation. So that's second point on that. So makes a big difference. And to back up the point even more is when they've researched remote tribes and civilizations that are still on their traditional diets for thousands of years, when they look at those people, they don't have the same metabolic disease that we do. They don't have the same rates of obesity and diabetes and dementia, heart disease, cancer. So they're way healthier. And they've been intensely studied, especially 100 years ago. There's very few of them alive today that are still on their traditional diets. But when they did look at that, all across the world now, they're way healthier on the traditional diet compared to the modern diet. So that's the third point that I would debunk, that idea that we haven't got less healthy. And then the last one is, even if you look at it from the point of view of even childhood obesity, and even what they used to call type 2 diabetes is adult onset, but lots of now kids are getting type 2 diabetes, and a lot of them are pre-diabetic.
That's scary.
Yeah, so for instance, 20% of kids are now in the obesity category, up again, way up compared
Just setting
to the
them up
last
for a
30, 40,
lifetime of
50
issues.
years. Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, and all these numbers and data and stats, which is pretty remarkable, has actually increased a lot more, which we're going to start to see a lot of research and data come out in the next few years post-COVID. Because during COVID, our health has actually gone way worse again, way worse, because
Not to
we
mention mental
exercise
health.
less. Yeah, we exercised a lot less. We had a lot more stress and stuff like that. And then we consumed a lot more processed foods. So hopefully, but definitely play devil's advocate. But like,
no, this is
does
great.
that clear up that point that it's not just because we're living longer, and we totally understand that before we move on.
Yeah.
I really want everyone to understand this, that's because people will bring up that point. It's probably the most common rebuttal initially.